The Knight Foundation's commitment to freedom of speech and investment in protecting the First Amendment makes them an ideal partner this year for what will be one of IGP's signature series going forward, Across the Aisle. This series will bring together leaders from across the ideological spectrum and around the world with a focus on how to govern, lead, and forge consensus in our polarized world. So please join me in welcoming Marc Lavallee, who is the Director of Technology Product Strategy for the Journalism Program at the Knight Foundation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So yes, I'm Marc Lavallee. I help run the journalism program at the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. I am not Jim Brady, the name in your program. He's my boss. He unfortunately got called away at the last minute, so I'm standing here in his place. He sends his apologies to everyone, especially to Governor Hogan, who was close with Jim's parents. Thank you also to Secretary Clinton and to Dean Yarhi-Milo. I'm honored to represent Knight Foundation at this important summit to mark the opening of the Institute of Global Politics at Columbia University. Knight Foundation is dedicated to supporting free expression, vibrant communities, and a more effective democracy. We believe the productive exchange of ideas fosters the shared understanding necessary to attain these goals. In the 20th century, the Knight brothers built one of the most successful newspaper companies in America. They were committed to great journalism because, more importantly, they were committed to their communities. Communities like Detroit, Akron, Ohio, Miami, Macon, Georgia, and many others. Jack Knight, who is the editor-in-chief of each of their fiercely independent newspapers, believed in the crucial role of the free press in its playing in our democratic system. A well-informed community, determining its own true interests, Jack Knight would say, is essential to the functioning of democracy. The Knight brothers believed that people of good faith, armed with a shared set of facts, could debate one another and find common ground, even across the aisle. In many places today, that would sound quaint. But what might be the most obvious statement of the afternoon is our national discourse is languishing. People of good faith are finding it difficult, if not impossible, to have productive conversations. But here today, I think we're seeing the precipice of that change. Professor Wu earlier even used the word dissent. I think that's a good start. And this is the right home for that effort. Knight has had a long and fruitful partnership with Columbia University. More than 20 years ago, we endowed the Knight Chair in Journalism in the Graduate School of Journalism, logical. We've been proud to support several initiatives in the Journalism School's Tao Center for Digital Journalism as well. But the challenges in communication in support of social cohesion are not just journalism problems. So in 2016, we invested $30 million to co-found the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia, which defends the freedoms of speech and the broader press in the digital age. Even on campuses like this one, where the spirit of exploration should thrive, we're seeing concerning trends. Knight regularly surveys college students nationwide about their attitudes on free expression and campus speech. And in our most recent report, in 2022, we found mixed attitudes. Most students still believe the exposure to a wide variety of ideas is important. And while they favor policies to limit racist speech, they otherwise tend to reject restrictions on the flow of ideas. But some 65% say they feel their school climate stifles free expression, and only about half of students continue to say they personally feel comfortable expressing dissenting ideas in class. This all points to a real need to see disagreement, productive disagreement, modeled. And the Institute for Global Politics will do just that. It will take the spirit of open inquiry that should be at the heart of the academic experience and expand it to the world's challenges. In so doing, it can help to form at a global scale Jack Knight's vision of a well-informed community determining its own true interests. The problems before us today are great. We are all living in a world brimming with complexities and challenges. A lot of the things that we've heard about today, partisan divides, AI-fueled digital disruption, labor and capital facing off as they haven't in decades. Amidst this, we are called upon to reimagine our civic infrastructure, to dismantle structural barriers that obstruct economic opportunity for historically marginalized communities, to reform education, policing, criminal justice, and to balance the necessity of economic growth with the reality of an increasingly uninhabitable planet. Jack Knight would tell us the solutions to these problems will be found through good faith debate. I believe we're all part of this summit, of this important new institute, because we believe that too. It is said that the quality of our conversations dictates the quality of our society. Simply put, we are inaugurating this Institute of Global Politics to encourage good conversations. I'm happy to kick off a great one featuring two thoughtful governors from opposing political parties who, in the words of great Columbia Law graduate and Columbia Law professor Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, know how to disagree without being disagreeable. To do that, I want to turn the mic back over to Dean Yarhi Milo. Thank you.
Thank you. In the spirit of modeling civil discourse, we could not have asked for a better or a timelier inaugural across the aisle. We have not one, but two governors, one a proud Democrat, the other a proud Republican. Governor Kathy Hochul is the 57th and first female governor of the great state of New York. When she was elected to Congress in 2011, she won in a long-standing Republican congressional district in New York State. The governor began her distinguished career as an aide to the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and her public record reflects his values and commitment to progressive causes. She will be in a conversation with Larry Hogan, who until this past January served as the popular governor of Maryland. When he was elected in 2014, he became only the second Republican governor of that state in 50 years. As governor, he was known for his pragmatic views and for working across the aisle, and he has been outspoken about the need for a third party in U.S. politics. A former small business owner, he started Change Maryland, the largest nonpartisan grassroots citizen organization in that state's history. We have one of the best in the business to moderate this discussion. Andrea Mitchell has been a fixture of nightly news going back several decades. She is currently NBC News Chief Washington and Foreign Affairs Correspondent. It is an honor to have the governors and Andrea Mitchell with us. Please join me in welcoming them to SIPA, to the inaugural Across the Aisle event.
Wow. What a great gathering. Thank you all so much. It's wonderful to be here on this wonderful campus. Secretary Clinton, I'm just so excited that you've inaugurated this and so pleased to be invited to be here. And there's no better example of someone who worked across the aisle, could be a fierce partisan when she needed to be, but was really interested in governing and in being, well, the great Secretary of State that I was privileged to cover around the world many times. 112 countries, was that, Madam Secretary? And to be here with these two wonderful governors. I know Governor Hogan a little bit better than Governor Hochul because I'm a former New Yorker, but long ago. And Maryland is, of course, right outside of the District of Columbia, and so we were covering you all the time. But this is frankly, a breath of fresh air. I've just come from anchoring a show live where the sole topic, well, there were several topics. There was Matt Gaetz trying to take down the speaker saying he was going to fight back, both parties caucusing, the Republican conference, the Democratic caucus today, and coming out with no real consensus. And there were opinions on all sides, but most of the Democrats were saying, basically, why should we bail him out? He started an inappropriate impeachment hearing. He went back on a debt ceiling agreement, and then the Republicans saying, you know, Matt Gaetz doesn't represent anyone, and they're going to be fighting it out on the floor as we speak. I brought my phone in case it breaks while we're here, because I once made the mistake of not carrying my phone in Aspen on stage when I was interviewing the Director of National Intelligence right after the Helsinki summit, where President Trump agreed with Vladimir Putin and rejected his own intelligence agencies, controversially. And while we were on stage, the president invited Putin for a return visit in the coming days, and that all was breaking around me, and people were trying to signal me, and I didn't have my phone, so a producer had to crawl up on the stage and pass me a note. And I read the note out loud to the Director of National Intelligence, who unfortunately, for himself and maybe for the country, responded very honestly with, you know, laughter at what the president had just done, which I'm told later by him and by the White House was what was really the end of his career, because he got fired several months later for that. So my phone is here in case anyone does anything crazy, but nothing crazy is going to happen on this stage.
No.
So let me get to some of these questions, because we want to talk about working across the aisle, and the two of you have done this throughout your careers. You know, you can fight for your political party and for your campaigns and your re-elections, but you know that you are in office to govern. That's the principle, and that's the kind of conversation I think that Secretary Clinton wants to engender here. So this is the spark. Governor Hochul, you've had quite a time. Floods, I don't know what other plagues can hit you, but at least there's some happy news with Charlotte, 9-year-old Charlotte being discovered. So that's part of governing, is dealing with emergencies, and at least you've come from a relatively happy ending. She's not physically harmed.
No, she is with her parents, and when I was with her parents 24 hours after the abduction up in a state park, which I run the state parks, I wanted to give them hope. I gave them a lot of love and hugs, but you just have this sinking feeling as every hour passes, the chance of this reunion is going to decline. So it's one of those few moments in life when you just have that sense of pure joy knowing the very human side of a governor has to be revealed as well. And just to say, I'm a mom, I can't imagine anything happened to my child. And but we have to govern. I have to deploy resources. I have to say, is that enough people? Or what are we doing with FBI? Do we have enough people in this part of the park? So you really have to, take your human side of you and just solve problems. And that's such a difference between being a legislator and someone in the executive branch. I've served at every level of government, from local government to county to member of Congress to lieutenant governor to governor. I've seen it all. But the one that actually makes the most difference, and I'm sure Larry will agree with this one, on many things he'll agree with me on today, is that you don't have any choice. I mean, yes, it's campaign time, you take your shots, but we have a job to do. And that's something I wish they'd understand in Washington. You're elected to do a job. And a radical idea I have is that, like, we have to govern and deal with people on all sides of the aisle. Just do your jobs and put America first. I mean, that should be the simple lodestar that guides every decision you make. Politics will find its way into the election. That's coming around the corner. But my gosh, so that's an example of just people doing their jobs, the law enforcement, the community, everybody coming together to a wonderfully successful outcome. And I was really glad I could be there.
And it was the state police who found the clue, the fingerprint on the ransom note.
It is very, very rare to get a ransom note in a child abduction case. And at 4:20 a.m., we had surveillance on the parents' house. So clearly he knew where she was from, and he just slipped in the mailbox, and it's dark, so they tracked him down. But the fingerprint on the ransom note, and it's extraordinary. So there are good days in this business as well. Today was certainly one, and last night was extraordinary.
And you've had experiences, good and bad, but with law enforcement, How much I'm going to ask both of you this, how much are you concerned that law enforcement is not being respected, that there has been, because of social media and the other media, cable and the like, amplifying discordant voices? Now we have much less monitoring, and there's actually a Supreme Court case now about to be argued today. I think there were oral arguments on the cases in Texas and Florida where whatever guardrails there were on social media are going to be debated.
Well, first of all, let me just start out by saying I agree with everything the governor said. We were off on the right foot, and I want to congratulate you and thank you for your leadership. I did this privately before we walked out here, but what an amazing positive outcome for that story with that beautiful little girl that you were, I thought it showed great leadership on behalf of the governor. Tremendous job by law enforcement working together. And I also thought the way that you went out and communicated to the public about exactly what happened and how we don't get those positive outcomes very often, and I think the governor is to be congratulated, her whole team and all the law enforcement. The job that they did. Thank you. Well, I don't know where to go with that. There's so much to say, and I want to keep the answer brief. But yeah, when all this kind of anti-police rhetoric got out of control, there were people across America that were talking about defunding the police. We had a city council member in Baltimore City that wanted to eliminate the police, and yet we've got rampant violence. And so I was one of the first leaders in America, elected leaders, to speak out against it and saying, if you want to improve policing and you want to do something about the violent crime, we've got to invest more in law enforcement so we can do a better job of recruiting and training and to give them the equipment and the body cams, and we do better retention and get a better quality of officer. And we got to support the men and women who put their lives on the line every day to protect the rest of us. So I started a refund the police initiative where I invested 50% more into state and local police and hired more officers. And the people in Baltimore City and other places were happy that they took that step because they're concerned about the safety in their own neighborhood. So I think we were demonizing. We certainly had some issues that had to be addressed, but saying you want to improve policing by defunding the police is like saying you want to improve education by defunding the schools. It was absurd, and I think most people have come around to changing the messaging and the discussion on that. But we had 89 days after I was governor, we had the worst violence in 47 years break out in our largest city of Baltimore after the death of a young man named Freddie Gray. And it was, we had 300 businesses destroyed in the first few hours, 120-some police and firefighters injured and in shock trauma at our hospitals. And I declared a state of emergency and sent in 4,000 members of the National Guard and 1,000 police officers, and immediately stopped the violence, but helped continue the peaceful demonstrations. And I walked the streets of Baltimore for a week, meeting with faith leaders and community leaders and the NAACP and walking Freddie Gray's neighborhood and trying to lower the temperature and listen to the concerns. And in 2020, when we had disturbances in cities across America, Baltimore was peaceful because the citizens worked with us to keep them calm, and they actually supported law enforcement and helped turn in some of the bad actors that came in from outside of the area to incite violence.
Well, and in fact, defunding the police was always a very minor view. It was never a policy. Jim Clyburn stated that over and over again. It was never the Democratic policy.
Right.
It was to refocus, retrain, and that legislation unfortunately never passed, I think. But the majority view. But I think I'm speaking more broadly about January 6th and about the rhetoric against the Justice Department and law enforcement and prosecutors and judges, which repeated again today, because the other thing that was hardly across the aisle is the trial that's going on down in Lower Manhattan, where you have, one of the defendants, the former president, speaking out against the judge and the attorney general day after day in very aggressive terms.
There are some basic tenets of a civilization, and that is you have to have order. And when chaos reigns in our streets, people turn to government for solutions. We understand that. I understand the outrage that swept this country after every one of us were shocked at seeing George Floyd murdered in cold blood. And there was understanding about the outrage and the way that Amir was held up to our country that questioned, how could this happen? but also gave us a chance to reset relationships with law enforcement and let law enforcement know that there's still the majority of us who respect what they do. I need them to be strong. They police, particularly my communities of color, where there have been waves of crime. And it's the shop owners in Brooklyn and in the Bronx who say to me, can you make the crime go away? I want to be able to be safe again. So we can't let the loud voices on one extreme or the other dictate our policy or even the narrative around our parties. And so I reject that Democrats support defunding the police. I have invested more, similar to what Larry Hogan did, I've invested more in law enforcement and policing strategies and training than anyone in the history of our state, and I'll continue to do that. But it's also, I work to foster understanding of relationships and sensitivity and understand, hire people that are more diverse and look like the community. So there's ways that we can try to control it, but I've said I don't want anyone in my presence who's talking about defunding the police, because that is so extreme and it's so anti who we are, because they're the ones that allow us to have the freedoms and the ability to go freely and security. And when we have a crime wave like we had during the pandemic, crime went up all over America. It's interesting to hear some Republican governors, crime wave in New York City. We're the safest big city in America. We truly are. These subway crimes, that's all you see in the news, subway crimes. We have over 6 million people on the subway every day. There are on average 4 to 6 incidences, and I'm not talking about shootings, I'm talking about something, someone steals a cell phone or hits someone, or someone with a mental health episode. We know it's a problem, and we'll never say it's satisfactory, but also these narratives they surround a party sometimes, or policies, and they're so wrong, but they get a lot of clicks. Boy, they get a lot of attention, right? That's far more interesting than saying, oh, the crime rate under Governor Hochul is down, 35%. Shootings are down. The top 4 states in America with the lowest rate of homicides per 100,000, the top 4 or 5, we're number 4. It's Hawaii, it's New Jersey, it's Massachusetts, and New York. All Democratic states, so these are the safe states. So that's something we have to fight against, is the narrative that's out there that Democrats are lawless, that we support defunding the police, and that we don't care about civilized society.
Let's talk about something that's closely related, which is gun violence. You've both had terrible experiences. When the Capitol Gazette killings happened in 2018, you responded with some gun reform measures, gun safety measures. You did after the horrible Buffalo grocery shootings. How did you, as a Republican governor and a leader of your party, head of the Republican governors, and head of the NGA as well, how did you have the support to get gun legislation through?
Well, I think this is one of those issues that, like the one we just talked about, where the parties talk past each other. We all want solutions, and everybody wants less gun crime, but there's a lot of finger pointing, and people are trying to score points on both sides. Just you were talking about the defund police was just a narrative that took hold, and the Republicans are messing. On gun control, it's the same thing. So we have, I think, the toughest gun laws in America in Maryland, and New York has some of the toughest gun laws. Mm-hmm. But it's not stopping all the gun crime. And so when the Capitol shooting was tragic, I was there that day when those journalists were killed. I signed into law a red flag law right. that would keep guns out of the hands of the mentally ill. And this guy would have been stopped if we had that law in place, could have been stopped at least, because he showed all kinds of signs that he's mental health issues and threats and things that we're doing. It's not a very popular thing among Republicans, but I've always, my whole life, believed that we need to keep guns out of the hands of the mentally ill and out of the hands of criminals with criminal backgrounds. And I'm for a universal background check, which a lot of Republicans don't support. However, I don't think just gun laws and gun restriction laws are the total answer, because we have tough laws. We still have 300 and some people murdered in Baltimore. Every single day there's a shooting because we're not really, there's no accountability or no tough prosecution of the people shooting people with guns. So I tried to pass through my legislation. We're the bluest state in America. We have a 75% progressive Democratic legislature in both houses. I passed some of the first criminal justice reform in America. We lowered our prison population, Second Chance Act, retraining, lots of things we worked with Democrats. I could not get tougher sentencing for repeat violent offenders and people that committed felonies with a gun. And so the problem is, it's mostly gang-driven, drug-driven. You have the mental health is a big issue, which we need to invest more. We try to divert more money from the prisons into mental health and drug treatment. But the criminal element don't follow gun laws. You know, and law-abiding citizens aren't usually the ones shooting people in the streets. And so even if you have tough gun laws, if people are you know, we're not arresting people for shootings and murders and committing repeat felonies, that's a problem. And that's when we have to come together and say, let's have reasonable, let's keep guns out of the hands of the bad guys without restricting all of the law-abiding citizens, and let's maybe have some accountability and punish the people that keep committing the crimes.
No, I commend you for the red flag laws and the universal background checks. Put those right in the no-brainer category. And why that's not a national policy, I'll never understand. And
Yeah.
shame on Congress for not being able to get that done, because it makes sense. I was just checking our statistics after the Buffalo massacre, and we'll call it still Senator Clinton to us, because Secretary Clinton was our senator. She knows Buffalo, she knows all of upstate, she knows the gun culture that is actually in most of the state, with the exception of the 5 boroughs. So in our own state, we have very divergent views on gun safety issues. So that's something we also have to deal with. But you look at the fact that someone was able to, at age 18, on their 18th birthday, walk into a store and buy a weapon that's designed for the battlefield, a military-style assault weapon at age 18, and be able to use that. He literally was looking for a place with the darkest, the blackest population, he said. Well, that could have been, I did the math, I did a GPS, 3 hours to Buffalo was the closest black population he could find, but he also could have been in 3 hours and 15 minutes been in the Bronx. So that was that arbitrary that he came to Buffalo, but targeted this community, went to a grocery store 10 minutes from my home, that's my neighborhood, and shot people with just a depraved heart and cruelty, following a manifesto that he had read from the massacre in New Zealand, the Christchurch massacre, we could get another whole topic about the influence in social media and how this information out there, if you call it information, this hate speech and these white supremacist views are out there so readily available for someone to really absorb that content and act on it. So we had to have guns, laws to change at age 21 to buy an assault weapon. I would have liked to ban it, but I'm not able to. The red flag laws, we now, since I instituted improving upon those, we had 12,000 orders of protection issued to stop someone who otherwise could do harm to themselves or someone else. That's the whole nature of a red flag law. So we've made those changes, and again, violent crime is heading way down in New York State, even in the 5 boroughs. We have they call the nuisance crimes, the crimes of against property, car thefts are up and others, but it takes courage. It takes courage to stand up to a belief in a party that there are no laws that are acceptable for someone who owns a gun because of the Second Amendment. That interpretation has been misappropriated, is the nicest way I'll say it. It's just wrong that we have to go back to the founding fathers to determine what our gun laws should be here today. And that's not me saying that, that's what the Supreme Court said last year when they struck down a law I had in the books for 100 years to stop people from carrying a concealed carry weapon on our New York State subways. So this is the battle right now. It's not just Congress. We're at war with the Supreme Court that is openly hostile to the rights of a governor, talk about states' rights. I had to work hard to try and get the pieces back so you don't have people walking through Times Square with a gun in their pocket. That's a recipe for disaster, lawlessness, the likes of which we do not want to see here in New York. So it's standing up to that is critical. I think more people should do that. And there's a path forward, just common sense people saying, do you want to save lives or not? Does this policy work in Maryland? It worked in New York. Why not make it a nationwide policy? It's not that hard.
Just today, we heard from Henry Cuellar, the Democratic congressman from Texas, who was carjacked last night, a mile from the Capitol, right near the Navy Yard. As he described it, 3 punks, each with guns, were in front of him, one behind him, one on the side, and wanted his car keys. And he said, when I saw 3 guns, I handed over my car keys. And
that's the point I was trying to make, that even though Maryland, New York, and D.C. have the toughest gun laws, it's not stopping the shootings or the carjackings or the murders, because they're still getting guns. And they're not, if you're a murderer or a drug dealer or a gang member and you're violent, you don't really go say, I have to go check the registration.
It's arguably
and
a
see if
national problem. Let me talk to you about voting, because we're heading into what we could say is the most important election of our lifetime, potentially. And you ran into some Republican opposition on an early voting law.
I was just trying to do what Larry Hogan did in Maryland. That's what I should say. You have early voting. You have access to the ballot box should be about as mom and apple pie as anything we ever talk about. Why would you want to have restrictions? Why would you make it harder for people to exercise a right that thousands of people before our time have lost their lives on battlefields across this world to defend the right to vote? And I simply did pass legislation, signed legislation last week, a package of 10 bills that said that people in the state of New York could vote by mail 10 days before the election. You would think that I was proposing the end of civilization as we know it. I mean, oh my God. And you look at the credibility of the people that were attacking me. One certain congresswoman from the North Country. Wait a minute, you supported the overturning of an election. You did not criticize an assault on the symbol of our democracy, our nation's capital, and you're okay with George Santos lying his way to the job. Haven't heard you talk about the trial going on in New York City, but I'm the one undermining democracy because, my God, people could vote by mail, as they did during the pandemic so successfully, as they've done in places, 14 other states, including Republican states. So this is what we're having to deal with. I mean, it's so irrational. It's maddening, but for someone like myself, I say bring it on. I mean, you want to take me on about democracy in the state? I'll have that debate any day of the week.
Well, we've been doing vote by mail in Maryland for like 30 years,
Yep.
and a lot of people.
That's what I'm saying.
A lot of people. We've never had an issue.
Can you tell Elise Stefanik
We
that?
expanded early voting. We tried. This is it shouldn't be
I know.
a partisan issue. About let's try to get more people participating in democracy and expressing their opinions and voting for the people and the issues they care about. I don't know how it got so far off track. I mean, with the President Trump attacking the credibility of elections. Look, we want to make sure everyone has a chance to vote, and we want to make sure the votes are counted fairly. But this false attack on that was scaring people off, and it really hurt Republicans because we typically, for years, even though we don't have very many Republicans, they voted by mail far more often than Democrats because it was a lot of older voters who said it's easier to vote by mail than showing up and standing in line at the poll. Well, now no Republicans turned out because they were told not to. It really advantaged the Democrats.
Okay.
But look, and talk about standing up to democracy, and just a little bit of a segue. The assault on the Capitol was the worst thing that's happened in our nation. And, I immediately sent the Maryland State Police, 250 riot-trained police, and I called up the Maryland National Guard, and leaders of Congress were calling me as the next-door governor begging for help. And we were the first ones to arrive, the first Maryland National Guard and Maryland State Police. And so, I mentioned earlier about the standing up and taking action when we had rioting in Baltimore, but I stood up and took action when there was assault on democracy. As well.
No, you did.
Keeping people safe and standing up for law, the rule of law, is our most important job as governors.
Well, and you were standing in because the District of Columbia, I'm a resident there, as is the secretary, at least, has a residence there. Our mayor has no right to call in the National Guard. She has to get that permission from the president or the Secretary of the Army. And
It's supposed
that
to be the
was
Secretary of Defense. A quick story on
Secretary of
that.
Defense, rather.
So we called up the troops right away. We tried to get the approval of the Secretary of Defense. Couldn't get it. Steny Hoyer calls me on his cell phone. He's in a room with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and he says, Governor, the Capitol Police are overrun. We desperately need your help. There's no one here. And I said, Steny, Maryland State Police are on the way, should be there any moment. I've already activated the Guard. They're mobilizing on the border of the district. And the mayor had called me. We could not get the approval of the Secretary of Defense for 2.5 hours. As we were taking action and sending people, the president was sitting in the Oval Office or in the White House watching television and taking no action. And finally, 2.5 hours later, I get a call on my cell phone I don't recognize. I answer it anyway. I normally would say, let it go to voicemail. And the guy says, Governor, this is Ryan McCarthy. I'm the acting Secretary of the Army. Could you please send the National Guard? And I was like, it's good enough for me. It's not the Secretary of Defense, but I'm sending them in.
And that was, I should add, that's all documented in the January 6th committee report. All of that was testified to.
Yeah, I testified.
That whole sequence. Speaking of elections, I wanted to ask you about third-party runs and No Label. You are the national co-chair of third-party, of No Labels, bipartisan. But as you know, there's a lot of concern among Democrats, I'm sure you've heard it, that would lead to, if it is a Biden-Trump rematch, that would lead to the re-election of Donald Trump, which is something you don't support.
I followed all of that, and I'm not sure I agree with it, but I got involved in this my whole career has been about bipartisanship and trying to reach across the aisle to come up with common sense solutions to problems that the governor was talking about earlier. And I was chairman of the National Governors Association. I got all 50 governors to agree on a number of things like infrastructure. The No Labels, that's what they've been about for 13 years. It had nothing to do with this new iteration. They have the Problem Solvers Caucus who got infrastructure done, who are the ones taking us back from the brink and trying to resolve the budget crisis right now. It's people in the center, 32 Democrats, 32 Republicans. This organization was formed by people that worked in the Clinton administration. They're Democrats. Joe Lieberman was the founding chairman. They asked me to be an honorary chairman 3 years ago, and I believed in what they were doing. It is a very bipartisan group. Now, there's a demand out there, and they're thinking about this, and it's not something I'm pushing, it's not something I'm actively pursuing, but 70% of the people in America currently do not want Donald Trump or Joe Biden to be the nominees. And so they're looking for, could there be another alternative? 68% of the people in the country have said they would consider an alternative. 44% of the people in the country are now registered independent, which is far more than there are Democrats or Republicans. And 59% of the Democrats don't want Joe Biden, and 50% of the Republicans don't want Donald Trump, and yet that's going to be the choice. So that's what's driving this kind of demand for this group to say, for the good of the country, can you put together a unity ticket of a Republican and Democrat to come together? I don't know if it's going to work. So we're a long way from what happens in the spring. But I frankly, I think I'm working very hard to try to nominate someone other than Donald Trump. I'm not having a lot of success for my party. And I think the Democrats would be better with a stronger candidate, because I'm afraid that the two of them are the two least popular presidents in American history, and they're both in the 30s. And so if you talk about a spoiler that's going to help nominate Donald Trump, maybe a stronger Democratic nominee would be the way to stop that.
Governor Hochul?
Well, I agree with Governor Hogan on an awful lot of things, but not that one. I support President Biden, and history will judge him more fairly than the current day does. They'll look at all the work he did on infrastructure. As the governor, I'm thrilled that he was able to get billions of dollars of infrastructure dollars so I can finish the Gateway Tunnel that dozens of elected officials before were not able to do. You don't ever want to disrupt the heartbeat of the rail line from New York to Baltimore. So we're making those investments in chips manufacturing. This didn't happen under anybody else. We're going to have 50,000 jobs in upstate New York. When Micron comes, they could have gone anywhere. In fact, they were going toward Texas, and I lasted them back. So there's a lot he's done in terms of the clean energy initiatives and internet accessibility, broadband across our states. So history will look at what he did, analogous to some of the accomplishments of not just FDR, but LBJ. So I've studied history a long time. People rarely love the person who's in power at the moment, and I think that people realize that he was a strong president, and I am concerned about this alternative because there's naturally a rejection against the person who's in now in favor of the new flavor, and I think that could be harmful to talk about an assault on democracy. If we elect Donald Trump, heaven help us, and I don't want any path going forward that could end up with that result, inadvertently or not.
Well, and I'll just throw out there that there's a Democrat now talking about a third party run that has nothing to do with No Labels or a unity ticket or a Republican at the top of the ticket, which might take from Donald Trump. But it's just something we're going to have to figure out. But I just think that there's a lot. You just look at polling; people are not really pleased with the two choices. I wasn't making a personal attack on Joe Biden.
No.
It's what Democrats are saying.
No, but I think, I mean, 1 year from now, there'll be a binary choice between two candidates.
Yep.
It will be Biden versus Trump, and this country needs to reelect Joe Biden.
Well, we fortunately have to leave it there. It's been lively and productive. I think we've heard some great agreements, as well as one minor little disagreement. But I just want to thank both of you, Governor Hochul, Governor Hogan, for participating in this, because it's been my privilege to be here with you and to see two people who really believe in the service of public
Thank you for
service.
inviting us, Secretary Clinton.
Thank you, Secretary Clinton.
It's been an honor.
Thank you
Thank you
very
all
much.
very much for having us.